example of one problem, but as we began to engage with these different challenges and look at ways to overcome them, we linked that to literature and began to question different aspects of the course. And I guess it's that questioning that began to lead us into, well, how can we do research to evaluate, to check, to see what's really happening in terms of teaching and learning, and to evaluate the course. As you might imagine, it's a university-wide program, so there's also kind of an oversight upon it by the English Language Working Party and high-level scrutiny, where the university will see, well, they've invested this much money in having these lecturers develop this program. What are the outcomes and what are the results of it? So there's also institutional pressure to produce research that's showing that there is language enhancement and that students are coming out of the course much better than perhaps they were entering. There was also the perception amongst some academics that these courses would be the silver bullet. It would solve all the language problems. Students would come in, they'd do this course, and they'd come out reading and writing and producing wonderful academic texts. Totally capable of, in-depth and accurate use of language for academic context, which of course is not necessarily realistic. In the ESL sector, they talk about courses and gains in student proficiency, and they look at things like 400 hours of course time. Now, one course over the semester, we're looking about 42 contact hours, so quite a discrepancy, and to evaluate the language gain within that time is quite challenging. But nevertheless, we wanted to try and do that, and so we began to initiate several different research projects. The first one that is forthcoming as an IELTS research report has been looking at two cohorts of students. And the first cohort was kind of prior to the English language enhancement courses, where we took one group of students and gave them an IELTS test before a semester, and then we gave them an IELTS test after the semester to assess what kind of language gain had happened over one semester. And then in 2010, the first year of the enhancement courses, we did the same thing. We gave the students an IELTS test before the semester, and then a second IELTS test at the end of the semester. So we're using IELTS as, to try and measure the proficiency gain of the student in that time. But right from the very beginning, we were aware, hang on, proficiency gain as measured by IELTS is not the only thing we want to measure. There's a lot more that needs to happen for students to be successful at university, particularly in the realm of language use. So we also had focus groups throughout the 2 semesters, early, mid, and late. And the aim of the focus groups was to develop some qualitative feedback and ideas about the value of the courses to students, the degree they had, the degree of engagement they had, both with language learning as well as in their other courses, and other socio-cultural issues. So those two complemented each other quite nicely. And as I said, it's forthcoming in an IELTS research report. But we discovered quite a number of very interesting things. Some of them are not that surprising. The first one is that language proficiency gain is incredibly complex. And so measuring it in this kind of short space of time is relatively difficult. And perhaps the IELTS test is a slightly blunt instrument that can't give us a fine enough detail about proficiency gain. But we also found some other interesting details. One of those was that actually to do with predictors of academic success and other actions. And I encourage you to read the research report if you're interested. It's got a lot in it that I won't go into here, but what I wanted to show is that the idea of, well, how do we measure language proficiency gain? This was one method we took, but because of the complexity, it is very difficult to measure proficiency gain in such a short period of time. And there's a lot of research out there looking at different ways to measure proficiency gain. We also thought, well, what are the student experiences like? What are the students engaging with in the course? What do they see as valuable? So Anna did some research that focused on this, and this was largely what was presented at the Hertz conference. Okay, issues, attitudes, expectations, effectiveness. And then we also wanted to look at language learning issues, what kind of issues were involved with language learning, student attitudes towards English, expectations of the English language enhancement course. So what did they feel were the benefits of studying it or not? But again, this is all focused on the semester in which the students took the English language enhancement course. And of course, we're interested in, well, how effective is ELIC and what modifications should we make? So it's feeding back into teaching and learning as well. We also began to do research on specific initiatives. So one of the things that we looked at was a university service reflection task. And this task was where students would access a university service and write a simple 300 to 500 word reflection on their experience. And we began to research that from a number of different angles. And one angle is looking at that use of kind of forced reflection, and also how useful that is for students and the types of reflection that occurred in those papers. So we did a text analysis and looked at the critical reflection, how much was critical and things like that. And that's another paper that Ben and I wrote. Ben also, he was teaching in the health area, and he was struggling to find core concepts that covered the whole health group. So that idea of discipline specificity. So how do we find material that is appropriate to all of the disciplines in health? And one of the things he developed was he started using texts on self-efficacy. And that development of materials for his course then led into an assessment of that, and again a publication in a journal about that development of self-efficacy and his use of that in his courses. Before I mentioned Anna's research that was looking at student expectations and experiences, but it was the students who did it in one semester. But I started thinking, well, we don't just want to know what their experience was in the first semester of their first year and how they felt about ELIC, because as they go through university, students may begin to value the course more. They may have different language learning needs, and they may begin to perceive it differently, either as having greater value, having perhaps less value, but also as they move through the university, seeing how their perceptions of their language needs and what changes over time. So we also initiated a longitudinal study that's trying to assess students' perceptions of language over time throughout their degree, so that the 3 years there at university. And I'll stop there because one of the purposes was I wanted to kind of throw out some ideas about how you link an initiative in teaching and learning and courses that you're teaching to develop different research aspects from that. So I'd like to open for questions.
I'll preface this little question session actually with we provided a couple of questions to each of the speakers today, focused on the things that we're going to do in the next activity. You notice that Rowan covered some things were important questions for this particular aspect. Now, where the idea of the project came from, what was the need for the project, in particular for research, what was about the project that was significant and had a need, and what consideration you give to the approach early in the process. And you can see each of these things coming out of what Rowan was doing. So I'll open up questions now. What have you got? Felicity.
Well, that was really interesting. I'm interested about the implications of what you've learned in this project and what you're doing to helping students from Australia who are not from different culturally diverse backgrounds but who have terrible English. So any pointers for academics teaching their own discipline, but to incorporate some of your ideas that you might have learned from your research?
It's a very good question. With widening participation, obviously, that's going to be an increasing issue is the level of language ability of students who are domestic students coming into our courses. I think a lot is relevant, but then again, I think we also do need to consider international students as a different cohort of students with different learning initiate a non-native speaker into the discourse of our academic community needs to be different, I think, to the way you initiate a domestic student in the discourse of an academic community. However, having said that, I think when you look at skills, when you look at text types, and you look at the deconstruction of text types to then explain that and use that as a teaching tool, I think that would still be very useful for domestic students. And so there is a lot of crossover, and some aspects would be relevant. One of the things we kind of found through the research is international students come into university with the expectation that actually language is an issue. But they also come in with the expectation, well, they've got into university, so their language should be good enough already. So there's this dual tension there, that they're feeling that their language is good enough to be here, so they shouldn't really have to do any more language study. But at the same time, they're expecting to have difficulties that relate to language, and expect the universities to provide support mechanisms for them to develop language. So there's a tension there of kind of almost two opposing belief systems. And I think we might find a similar thing with domestic students, that they're going to enter university expecting that they don't really have to develop their language skills, but at the same time expecting the university to provide support and mechanisms for them to increase their writing skills or oral presentation skills or things like that.
Do you build into your courses kind of metacognitive process around the discourse of the academy, so that the students, and I mean this would apply as much to domestic as to international students, the whole difference in what the kind of types of thinking that they're expected to provide evidence of. I find a lot in my work that it's that like wrapping up the thinking that it often comes as a shock to first year students. The culture of university is so different from what they've experienced before, and it's transitioning into that more rigorous thinking, the whole business of referencing, of abstractions, of theory, those things that they often have. There's often a real difficulty, and I would have expected. Well, I mean, I'm not asking you whether you build that in, not necessarily overtly, but into the way you sort of scaffold and develop your courses.
Yes, we do, and we actually do it in different ways in different ones, the different LX. Our primary focus is language development, but of course you do need content upon which you, as the vehicle for language development. So I think in my courses we look at things like logic and rhetoric, we look at critical thinking, and we also look at using theories to view phenomena, situations, circumstances, and we use theories to critique theories. So at a basic level, we're developing language around this kind of content and helping students develop their language to be able to do these tasks. But there is that higher order thinking that is necessary and is expected. So I think we are trying to scaffold both at the same time.
All right, sir.
Got a couple